In September 1945, Admiral Chester Nimitz stood on the deck of the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay and watched Japan sign the instrument of surrender. Around him sat the most powerful navy in human history. 28 aircraft carriers, 23 battleships, 377 destroyers, more than 1,200 warships in total, displacing more combined tonnage than the rest of the world's navies combined. It was the peak of naval power measured by the standards that had defined naval warfare for 300 years: steel, guns, and the men who crewed them. 81 years later, Admiral Brad Cooper stood on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln in the Arabian Sea and described to the world the destruction of Iran's military infrastructure. There were no battleships. There were no 16-inch guns. Around him, invisible beneath the surface, were submarines that had spent months positioning themselves without anyone's knowledge. In the skies above, aircraft that had taken off from this same ship's deck were striking targets 300 miles away. And somewhere in a command center in Tampa, operators were watching feeds from autonomous drone systems that were finding and engaging targets without a human pilot in the loop. The distance between those two moments, between Nimitz in Tokyo Bay and Cooper in the Arabian Sea, is the story of the most profound transformation any military institution has ever undergone. It is not a story of linear improvement, of ships getting bigger and guns getting longer. It is a story of fundamental reinvention, of the U.S. Navy repeatedly abandoning the premises on which it was built and rebuilding itself around concepts that would have been unrecognizable to the previous generation of naval officers. And it is not finished. The reinvention is happening right now, faster than at any point since the Second World War, driven by a combination of autonomous systems, artificial intelligence, directed energy, and unmanned platforms that are changing what it means to have a navy. The first reinvention happened before the war ended. The battleship, the symbol of naval power for a century, was rendered obsolete not by an enemy fleet, but by an American air attack. December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor. Japanese carrier aircraft, launched from ships 230 miles away, sank or damaged 8 American battleships in 2 hours. The battleship that had been the instrument of naval dominance for 100 years, the ship that Naval Doctrine had organized entire fleets to protect and support, was sunk at anchor by aircraft it never saw, and guns it could not range. In 2 hours, every pre-war assumption about what a navy was and how it fought was proven wrong. The Navy adapted with extraordinary speed. By June 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Battle of Midway was decided entirely by carrier aviation. No battleship fired a shot. No surface ship came within visual range of the enemy. 4 Japanese carriers were sunk by American dive bombers launched from American carriers. The battleship did not disappear immediately. It was too useful as a shore bombardment platform and as an anti-aircraft escort to be discarded outright. But its role as the centerpiece of naval power was permanently transferred to the aircraft carrier, and every naval officer who had spent his career learning how to fight the Jutland-style battle of fleet against fleet, battleship against battleship, had to relearn everything. The carrier's dominance produced its own doctrine, and that doctrine defined American naval power for the next 50 years. The Carrier Battle Group, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier at the center, surrounded by a constellation of cruisers, destroyers, and submarines whose primary purpose was to protect the carrier and extend its reach. The air wing provided the strike power. The escorts provided the protection. The submarines provided the undersea warning and the anti-ship capability that guarded the group against enemy submarines and surface threats. This basic architecture, established in the 1960s and refined through the Cold War, is still recognizable in the carrier strike groups operating in the Arabian Sea today. But within that consistent architecture, the individual components have been reinvented multiple times. The aircraft have gone from propeller-driven torpedo bombers to jet fighters to supersonic strike aircraft to fifth-generation stealth platforms. The weapons have gone from iron bombs to laser-guided munitions to GPS-guided weapons to long-range cruise missiles that can be retargeted while in flight. The sensors have gone from visual observation and hydrophone arrays to satellite-integrated networks, over-the-horizon radar, and AI-assisted fusion systems that can track hundreds of targets simultaneously. The communications have gone from flag signals to encrypted satellite data links that allow a commander in Tampa to watch a drone feed from the Arabian Sea in real time. The most consequential individual reinvention was the nuclear submarine. In January 1955, USS Nautilus proved that a submarine did not need to surface. That single change eliminated every anti-submarine warfare doctrine the Navy had spent 2 world wars developing. A submarine that never surfaces cannot be found by aircraft or surface ships looking for snorkel exhausts and periscopes. It cannot be tracked by the acoustic signatures of diesel engines running at the surface. It operates in a medium that is fundamentally opaque to every sensor that works in air. The nuclear submarine took the submarine from a tactical weapon that could hide for hours to a strategic instrument that could remain hidden for months, operating anywhere on Earth with a payload that could reach targets hundreds of miles inland. The missile was the next reinvention. The Polaris program, which put nuclear-armed ballistic missiles aboard submarines beginning in 1960, created the most survivable element of the American nuclear deterrent. The cruise missile, which gave surface ships and submarines the ability to strike land targets at ranges measured in hundreds of miles with accuracy measured in meters, transformed the surface force from a defensive escort into an offensive strike platform. The Tomahawk, which made its combat debut in Desert Storm in 1991, is still being fired today at targets in Iran. The same basic concept, a subsonic cruise missile with terrain-following guidance and a conventional warhead, updated through multiple variants over 35 years, but recognizable in its fundamental design across the entire period. The precision revolution of the 1990s was the next reinvention. GPS guidance and laser designation transformed the Navy's air wing from a force that dropped unguided bombs by the hundreds to achieve statistical probability of hitting a target into a force that could put a weapon through a specific window of a specific building. The Joint Direct Attack Munition Kit, which added a GPS guidance package to a standard iron bomb at a cost of roughly $20,000 per unit, gave every aircraft in the fleet the ability to strike specific, pre-planned targets in any weather, day or night, without flying over the target to visually acquire it. The Joint Standoff Weapon, which added wings and a GPS guidance system to a bomb to give it a 50-mile glide range, allowed strike aircraft to release weapons far outside the range of most surface-to-air missile systems. These were not new platforms. They were new capabilities applied to existing platforms, and their effect on what a carrier air wing could accomplish was transformative. The network revolution followed. The cooperative engagement capability, which allowed every Aegis-equipped ship in a strike group to share sensor data and engage threats using the best-positioned weapon, regardless of which ship detected the threat first, transformed the carrier strike group from a collection of individually capable ships into a single integrated combat system. An SM-3 interceptor fired from a destroyer 50 miles from the carrier can intercept a ballistic missile that was detected by the carrier's own radar, coordinated by the cruiser's fire control system, and authorized for engagement by the strike group commander on a different ship entirely. The network made all of those ships functionally one defensive system with distributed sensors and distributed weapons. The unmanned revolution is the reinvention that is happening right now, in real time, and its implications are as profound as any of the reinventions that preceded it. In 2025, the U.S. Navy had 4 small unmanned surface vessels in its inventory. By the end of fiscal year 2025, that number was close to 400. By 2027, projections call for 500 small unmanned surface vessels and dozens of medium and large unmanned platforms. By 2045, the Navy projects that approximately 45% of its surface force will consist of unmanned systems. One carrier strike group will be a very different entity if 45% of the ships around it operate without crews. The Sea Hunter and Seahawk, medium displacement unmanned surface vessels developed by Leidos using its autonomous vessel architecture, are the most capable unmanned surface ships currently operating. They are not experimental vessels any longer. In January 2026, Captain Garrett Miller, Commodore of Surface Development Group 1, told the Surface Navy Association Conference in Washington that the two platforms would no longer be experimental. They would be under fleet control, assigned to surface forces, able to conduct real missions alongside manned ships. By 2026, one of these platforms was scheduled to deploy with a carrier strike group, the first time in history that a fully autonomous surface vessel has operated as a formal member of a carrier battle group formation. The Liberty class, announced in February 2026, represents a further step toward the unmanned surface fleet. A 190-foot autonomous warship designed from the start for long-duration unmanned operations, the Liberty class is being developed by Blue Water Autonomy using a proven commercial hull adapted for naval operations without crew. It can remain at sea for extended periods without requiring crew rotation, without requiring the food, water, and life support systems that define the operating costs of a crewed warship. Its CEO described it as building autonomous ships designed for long-duration operations and repeat production. Mass production. The Navy's explicit goal of scaling unmanned systems rapidly requires a production model that commercial shipbuilding can sustain, not the artisan approach that produces $12 billion carriers one at a time. The underwater unmanned dimension is advancing on a parallel track. Anduril's Dive XL, selected for the Navy's Combat Autonomous Maritime Platform project, is an extra-large autonomous underwater vehicle designed to operate in GPS-denied environments, dive to over 200 meters, and carry multiple payload modules simultaneously, including smaller unmanned underwater vehicles of its own. A drone that carries drones. An underwater mothership that can deploy a swarm of smaller sensors and weapons from a single autonomous hull. The Ghost Shark, developed by Anduril for the Royal Australian Navy under the AUKUS framework, is a similar concept scaled for the Australian context, with intelligence and strike missions and entry into service expected in 2026. The low-cost unmanned combat attack system, Lucas, made its naval combat debut on December 16, 2025, when the Independence-class littoral combat ship USS Santa Barbara launched one from its flight deck in the Arabian Gulf. The first time in American military history that a one-way attack drone was launched from a naval vessel at sea. Lucas costs between $35,000 and $40,000. It can be launched from catapults, rocket-assisted takeoff systems, and mobile ground and vehicle systems. Vice Admiral Kurt Renshaw, commander of U.S. Naval Forces Central Command, described the first launch as a significant milestone in rapidly delivering affordable and effective unmanned capabilities to the warfighter. Lucas was formally employed in combat during Operation Epic Fury beginning February 28, 2026, striking Iranian command and control facilities and IRGC infrastructure across the country. A $35,000 drone launched from a $600 million warship, striking targets that a decade ago would have required a $2 million Tomahawk or a crewed aircraft, putting a pilot at risk. The cost economics of the unmanned revolution are as significant as the tactical and operational implications. The Drone Dominance Initiative, announced by the Department of Defense in early 2026, seeks capacity for roughly 300,000 to 340,000 small drones over approximately 2 years, with aggressive unit cost targets in the low thousands of dollars. Not tens of thousands. Thousands. The Navy is investing $7 billion in unmanned systems in fiscal year 2026 alone, with $3.7 billion of that specifically allocated to the surface force. These are not test and evaluation budgets. They are procurement budgets, buying systems intended for operational deployment at scale. The artificial intelligence dimension of the unmanned revolution is the element that makes the current reinvention qualitatively different from everything that preceded it. Every previous reinvention involved new hardware operated by humans. Carrier aviation replaced battleships, but the carriers were still crewed by tens of thousands of sailors. Nuclear submarines replaced diesel submarines, but the submarines were still crewed by officers and enlisted who had spent years training for the specific acoustic and operational environment of undersea warfare. The Tomahawk replaced the manned strike mission against the most heavily defended targets, but it was planned and targeted and launched by humans. The unmanned revolution is, for the first time, beginning to remove the human from the loop for certain categories of mission, not from all missions, not from the decisions about whether and when to use lethal force, which remain human decisions by policy and by law, but from the execution of those decisions in ways that allow machines to operate faster, more precisely, and at greater scale than humans can manage. The Maven Smart System, the AI-assisted intelligence fusion tool that was deployed with carrier strike groups in the Red Sea during the Houthi counter-drone campaign, allowed automated tracking of incoming drone threats across a common operating picture that updated faster than human analysts could process. The engagement decisions remained human, but the information that informed those decisions was assembled and presented by an AI system operating faster than the human cognition it was designed to support. When the Navy says that future autonomous systems will act faster, more precisely, and with less risk than humans ever could, it is describing a capability trajectory that is already underway, not a future aspiration. The reinvention that produced the carrier struck down the battleship. The reinvention that produced the nuclear submarine struck down every anti-submarine warfare doctrine of 2 world wars. The reinvention that produced precision, guided munitions struck down the mass bombing doctrine that had defined air power since World War II. The reinvention that produced the cooperative engagement capability struck down the individually operated ship doctrine that had governed surface warfare since the age of sail. The unmanned revolution, combined with artificial intelligence, directed energy, and autonomous coordination, is striking down the fundamental premise that has defined naval power since the invention of the warship, the premise that naval power requires human beings aboard warships, that the ship is a platform for people who use weapons. The emerging premise is different. The ship is a platform for weapon systems and autonomous capabilities that humans direct from safe distances, managing the decision architecture without being physically present in the threat environment. The sailor remains essential. The sailor becomes a manager of autonomous systems rather than an operator of individual weapons. Admiral Nimitz knew how to fight a naval battle with ships and guns and aircraft, crewed by men who could see their targets. Admiral Cooper knows how to fight a naval campaign where the most important actions are taken by systems whose crews are hundreds or thousands of miles away, or by systems with no crews at all. Both of them commanded the most powerful Navy in the world. The Navy that Cooper commands is the same institution that Nimitz commanded. It has never stopped fighting. It has never stopped evolving. And it has never lost its fundamental character, the character of an institution that learns, that adapts, that reinvents itself as the threat environment demands. From Iowa-class battleships to autonomous drone swarms, from 16-inch guns to 50-cent per shot directed energy lasers, from propeller-driven torpedo bombers to fifth-generation stealth fighters, from hydrophone arrays to AI-fused sensor networks. The transformation is total, the institution is the same. That is the real story of how the United States Navy reinvented war, not once, not twice, but continuously, over 80 years, without ever stopping. If you want to understand the specific technologies and systems driving the next phase of this transformation, what the Golden Fleet concept means for the composition of the Navy in 2035, and how the autonomous revolution is changing the fundamental calculus of how America projects power at sea. Subscribe to Navy Power Decoded. Every video goes deeper than the headlines. From battleships to drones, and the reinvention is not finished. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Darrell Caudle met with World War II veterans Paul Robbins, then 100 years old, and Eddie Desmond, 99, aboard the Battleship USS New Jersey Museum and Memorial in late 2025. He did not explain to them what a Lucas drone is or how an AI-assisted sensor fusion system tracks incoming threats at machine speed. He did not need to. They understood what they were looking at. Two men who had served on ships with 16-inch guns and propeller-driven aircraft understood that what had replaced their world was still the same institution, still fighting, still adapting, still refusing to be outmatched. Robbins and Desmond served during the first reinvention, the transition from battleships to carriers that proved the supremacy of naval aviation. They watched, across the span of their lifetimes, every subsequent reinvention unfold. The nuclear submarine, the precision revolution, the network revolution, the unmanned revolution. Every one of them incomprehensible to the generation that preceded it. Every one of them the product of the same institutions, same refusal to accept that the current way of doing things is the only way of doing things. The Navy that fought at Midway learned from Pearl Harbor. The Navy that fought in the Gulf War learned from Korea and Vietnam. The Navy that fought in the Red Sea and in Operation Epic Fury learned from every campaign that came before. And the Navy that will fight the next conflict, wherever it is and against whoever challenges American sea power, is learning right now from the Red Sea and from Epic Fury, incorporating the lessons into Doctrine, into acquisition programs, into training pipelines, and into the autonomous systems that are making the next reinvention real. That is not a continuous story of success. The LCS was a reinvention that failed. The railgun was a reinvention that failed. The Ford's EMALS was a reinvention that stumbled badly before it found its footing. Reinvention is not always successful. But the institution that attempts reinvention, even when individual programs fail, maintains the capacity to get it right the next time. An institution that does not attempt reinvention has no next time, from battleships to drones. 80 years of continuous reinvention. The most powerful Navy in human history, built on the premise that what worked yesterday is not necessarily what will work tomorrow. That is the American way of naval warfare, and it is still evolving.